Hello, everyone. This is episode 11 of the Soapbox with the Babbling Idiots. We are the Babbling Idiots. And today we have a special guest. We have Grace Chung. Say hello, Grace.
Hi.
We wanted Grace on the podcast because we read one of her recent articles on education and why college is not a good indicator of intelligence. So we wanted to have her on to talk about education, to share some of our thoughts on education. We had a very productive nice discussion. So without further ado, please enjoy our discussion. Okay, so I really liked your article. We already know that. Um, it's funny because you were talking about how uh, college isn't a good indicator of someone's intelligence. And funny story, just last night, as I was telling you guys before, I applied to James Madison University and I didn't make it in. The wait list was closed. And the funny thing is, so like my story is I did terrible in high school. I spent the last year at Nova. I got a 4.0 first semester, 3.9 last semester. So people are like, "Oh, you're good. You're good. Don't worry about it." And my friend from JMU starts hyping it up, and I'm like, "Don't hype it up. What if I don't get in?" So now I'm gonna have to spend at least the next semester there. I want to try to apply for spring semester because I just really don't want to go to Nova. But it's funny because like a lot of people that meet me, they're like, "Wow, you're the smartest person I've ever met," and I'm like, "You obviously haven't met a lot of people then." And but then I was like telling all my friends recently, I saw like you know how when people get their acceptance letters from schools and they post it on the social media and they're going crazy over it. So there's like this basic white girl that got into JMU recently, and like Patrick knows if there's two things I don't like in this world, they're like social justice warriors and basic white girls. And that's like I call it the white girl mentality. You don't have to be a white girl to have this mentality, but it's just a thing people have. So it's like it it's just like she's a smart person though. But like to see someone get it and then I don't get it is really disappointing, but I can't really blame anyone. So it's just one of those things like you're right to I say to a certain extent, but when people say that, they think that means like I agree with you in part, but I agree with you with like almost all of it. That especially in Fairfax County, like when I see people get into college here, I'm like, congratulations, you live in Fairfax County and your parents can afford this.
Yeah.
Like you're supposed to go to college.
Mhm.
So when I get into JMU, I get the acceptance. I'm not gonna like freak out. I'm gonna be like, I was supposed to do this.
Mhm.
Anyone else have to add to that?
I mean,
We're just getting into
I
it.
think that there's just this really large pressure to go to college in this area. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Mhm.
Do you think that the reason people go to college is just to fulfill this pressure essentially, or do you think it's a reason that like people want to go to find themselves or like explore something they're interested in?
Um, I'd have to say it depends on like the culture that you grew up in.
Mm-hmm.
So like as an Asian American, it's like kind of expected you're gonna go to college, especially for second generation kids like me because our parents came from Korea. So like yes, there's this expectation that you're gonna go to college, but I know there's like some people who are definitely pursuing what they're passionate about. Like I know a few kids who are going to music schools for either like violin or for singing. Um, but yeah, I definitely think there's just like this expectation that you should go, so you kind of do it without thinking. But obviously, like while you're at college, like you mentioned, like you might find yourself there or discover what you like. So.
Mm-hmm. I think we usually look at like pressuring kids to go into college as a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. It only becomes a bad thing when you have these parents that are, you know, you always people always use the term helicopter parenting, that just want their kids to get into like the best school. And I haven't read a book on education in a while, but there's a couple of good ones that I remember. Um, one was so there's this one called "Where You Go Is Not Who You'll Be" by Frank Bruni, and being someone that wants to be a teacher, I agreed with so many things in that book so much that I bought 3 copies of it for the 3 teachers that had the biggest impact on me in high school. Because anyone asks me why I want to be a teacher, and I have so many reasons I can't just explain it to you. But one of the reasons is because I had so many good teachers that had a big impact on me. So the idea of that book is in the title. It's parts of that book talk about these kids that have put so much pressure on themselves to get into Ivy League school. I think we're phasing out the valedictorian, and the reason for that is because kids would blow off family obligations and being with their friends and just having fun in order to do things that'll get them the valedictorian, because one person in your school gets the valedictorian status, and that's like something that people think is going to get them into Ivy League schools. So these kids would just not have fun and be completely stressed out their whole life just so they could get that to look appealing to these Ivy League schools. And also with extracurricular activities, like we take extracurricular activities because they're fun and in small part to impress colleges. But these kids would do all these things just to impress those colleges, when really, like everyone tells you, it's not a huge part. But when with Ivy League schools, I think I remember hearing like, oh, they expect you to speak this many languages and play this many instruments and play these many sports. And so it only becomes a problem to me when there's that level of pressure put on it. But I think um, if you ever hear me talk about, how people should be raised and what we should do with our kids, I think today there's too much. I think people are too worried to push their kids. You should be able to push your kids, but there's a place where it becomes too much. Like we kind of want to coddle our kids today and make them feel comfortable. And that's kind of the idea behind resisting all this like AP testing and 2 hours of homework for each class you have. And there's like, that is right, but we might also be losing our ability to push our kids to succeed.
At the same time, there's a lot of the time implied pressures and stuff like that. Like kids know that they're expected to go to a certain college or reach a certain grade point, and so that can cause a lot of stress. And something that you talked about in your article, Grace, was cheating, and also like cheating by like just skipping school essentially. And like, do you think that's because of stress or procrastination, or what do you think is the reason for that?
I'd have to say, well, I know for myself personally, I'm a big procrastinator, but I definitely did take all APs this year, which is why, like in previous years, like junior year, it was never a problem because I only took four. And so, like, it was manageable to procrastinate and still get my stuff done. But, like, senior year, when you have college applications and you're looking into scholarships and you're juggling all those APs, it's kind of like a two-way thing. Like, partly maybe I could have managed my time better, but also like I don't have enough hours in the day to get those things done. So, yeah, I guess it goes both ways.
There is
Hold on.
one thing we're talking about, like everyone's talking about today, is there is a legitimate concern about AP classes just being too much and just being busy work, and there is a lot of truth in that. When you have like at the beginning of the year, your teacher's like, this class will probably require 2 hours of homework a day. It's like, how do you know that? Like, the only way you could possibly know that is if you're just giving work that's has no reason other than to give people work. So, although I have a part of me that says we need to be able to push our kids. When I say push our kids, I'm not talking about just give them as much homework as you can. So I think there's an extent to where we're losing this ability to, like, make kids learn just for learning's sake and be able to just, like, maybe we're losing touch with it, but part of it, I don't know if the kids are losing it. It might be more that we're losing it and it's rubbing off on the kids. This idea that, what learning really is and why you go to school is to learn. And it's school's becoming more now something that's just made to prepare you for being out in the real world and having a job, which is funny because you always hear kids complain like, I was never taught how to balance a check or pay rent or any of that. But there should be that part to education to prepare you for the real world. But it's becoming such a huge part of it that we're learning we're losing the learning part and the finding yourself part and all that. Although it's ironic because in college we're saying that kids are spending too much time acting like college is a place to have fun with all the safe space stuff. But yeah, it's hard to say because there's just this part of me that wants to feel
A big
pushing our kids, but at the same time we're pushing them in the wrong way. And at the same time there's too much of us wanting to coddle our kids, but there is a certain extent where, having the kind of touchy-feely idea of, oh, you have to learn and find yourself and find what you're passionate about. We have to be able to find a way to teach kids to find their passions and to love what they do, but also to find something in finding something that they're passionate about, find something that they'll work very hard for.
part of that, to me, it seems, is that it seems like we're putting more emphasis on getting the grades, instead of actually
course, yeah.
learning. And to me, though, it just seems hard to figure out a system where it doesn't work like that. But that is a serious problem with this system, and it pressures people to do things like cheat and, just skip school, and just grades are where the pressure is instead of learning. And that's the thing that people should be concentrated on. And it seems like even when you go to college, which is supposed to be the biggest learning experience, there's big pressure to get that GPA and do those activities so you can get a job, and everything just seems streamlined, to put you right into the place where you're supposed to be in society. So I feel like there's this big problem in schools that needs to be addressed. It's learning.
Well, for like grades, I definitely think on like a student's part, it's a pressure. But I think where like our system also kind of fails is the teachers, because the teachers have this pressure to conform to the curriculum that they're given. And um, I know like College Board gives teachers like a lot of headache because when they change the standards, and essentially you're not preparing yourself to learn, but you're preparing yourself for a standardized test at the end of the year. And a teacher's job or like reputation is at stake when they can't prepare their students for that adequately. And I think that's just like another problem, because they're doing their job, but they can't do it the way they want because there's someone higher up that is managing these standards for them, and we have to conform to that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just AP tests either. Like, it goes all the way to elementary school with standards of learning and stuff. So I think that's a really good point, actually. And that I never really thought of that, about how we're not preparing for like the future or preparing to learn, but actually a lot of times it's just preparing for a standardized test. That's a really good point.
Mm-hmm. Any discussion you have over education, someone's going to bring up No Child Left Behind, which of course I have to bring up. So it was just an absurd thing. Like I wasn't, of age to understand politics at that time, but I'm not sure if it was one of those things where people thought it was going to work and it just didn't, or people just knew from the beginning this wasn't going to work. But it's just an absurd thing to think that, lower income kids in Harlem can achieve the same level that kids like us in Fairfax County can. So of course the standards of learning is just something that needs work. If we even need standards, because like what we're trying to say is, we just need to engender this idea to kids that learning it's not a solid thing, and it's not something you can structure, even though you want to structure it as much as you can. It took me failing like horribly in high school to understand that learning was something I had to do on my own more than something that other people could do for me. And that's like when you have someone that's a teacher, like someone has the job title teacher, you expect that person can teach you things, and they can. But when I become a teacher, I think the most important thing I can teach kids is that they can teach themselves more than I can. And I think that's important. I told my German class senior year, I've told Patrick this story. So my German class senior year, I decided I wasn't going to make the advanced diploma, so I didn't have to take German 3. So I was in there like the first couple of days, and I was about to get out of the class, but then I realized I do like learning German, so I stayed in class. So I stayed in that class just to learn German. I wasn't in it for, the advanced diploma or grades or anything. And So my class was just full of people that were just taking language to get the advanced diploma, and they didn't care about the language at all. And I might have finished with like a C in that class, so I did okay grade wise. But I spoke German really well. Um, like I was one of the best in the class. Like not to be arrogant, but these kids had A's in the class, but they didn't learn German and they didn't like any of it. So I told the whole class one day, I was like, you guys are so worried about your grades. If your first priority was to learn German, you would make the grades even though it wasn't your first priority, but then you would also speak the language and you would enjoy it. So those are three important things to get the grades. I'm not going to act like grades aren't important. Uh, Even though I put learning first, I still care about my grades. I still want straight A's, even if, like I get a B and I freak out and people tell me I'm wrong for doing that, but it's because I've learned the material. I feel like I should get the grade. But getting the grades, enjoying it, and learning it. So those are three important things. If the first thing you care about is getting the grades, then you might get the grade, but you're not going to enjoy it or learn it. If the first thing you put importance on is learning the material, then you're going to accomplish enjoying it and getting the grade. So the problem with our education right now is the whole system puts the most importance on getting the grades. So if we put all our thought into learning, then we would get those other things. And that's kind of just how I approach education in general. So like I've struggled between whether I want to go to JMU or UVA, because I can also choose to go to UVA because Nova has like the 2-year agreement, the guaranteed admissions. I've seriously considered UVA, but my only reason for considering it is because of the prestige. And I don't think it's a completely terrible thing to want to go to school for prestige, because I do like prestige. Because when I do a podcast and I write a blog, I want my ideas to get out there. So I think having some sort of prestige is important to me to get my ideas out there. But then when I think about the fact that I'd probably enjoy JMU more, and because that it would be easier for me to just go and learn stuff more, I think JMU would be a better place for me. And so that might be one of the problems that these kids that are just trying to get into Ivy League schools have, is they don't think about whether or not they're going to enjoy their time there. Of course, that's an important part, but like I was saying, it's not the only part. When that viral video goes up of the girl at Yale yelling at her professor that your job isn't to create an intellectual space, it's to create a home. No, you're wrong. The job of a professor is to create an intellectual space, but that doesn't mean that college shouldn't be a place where people can also have fun and enjoy some of the best years of their lives. So I just think I would always encourage kids to go to a place you're going to enjoy and study something you're going to enjoy and something you want to learn about. But of course, there should always be people should always feel driven to attain as much as they can.
Mm-hmm.
I think part of the reason that's such a big problem is just because you're asking people to choose what college they want to go to when they're still like deep in the spotlight effect, like where kids feel like everyone's like looking at them and judging them and stuff. So they're going to make decisions based on what they think other people will like, like what 18-year-old kid is going to be like, oh, I want to go to this school just because I want to go there. Like, no, they're going to be thinking about, I'm going to apply to these schools because I want people to think I'm smart or I'm cool or something like that, And it's just each school has a reputation about it, like WVU is a party school and UVA is where the smart kids go, right? So it's just, I think asking kids to choose what college they want to go to at this age where they think everyone is judging them, that's just a terrible idea,
Mm-hmm. I think also when I was I need to get back into like reading more education, because when I knew we were doing this, I was like, oh, maybe I haven't brushed up on it enough. But I feel like if I reach down, I can find some stuff. But there was this speaker that did a couple TED Talks, and one of his TED Talks is, I think, one of the most watched ones. His name's Sir Ken Robinson, because he's a British dude, so his first name apparently is Sir. I'm American, I don't understand this, but like, he's an education speaker, and he's one of those guys that speaks on, finding your passion and finding, you know, encouraging people to be creative. Like something we've probably talked about before, because you're a music person, is and something a lot of people are concerned about is the arts and the humanities being driven out of schools. And of course, a big part of that is because um, we're making a push towards STEM being taught in schools. And with that is the idea that we were talking about earlier of preparing kids for their jobs, for the labor market. And STEM is becoming an increasingly important field, and people feel that the arts are less and less important. Um, I I don't think we should ever discourage children from pursuing what really interests them. If you want to be a musician, we should encourage that, and I think taking away those programs would not be a good idea. But there should also be a part of, uh, we should let kids know and have them be realistic about what is going to get them a job. But so like kids should be told, like, hey, you want to go into the arts, you're going to have trouble making it in that. But after that, we should encourage them to go. And I think about this, you're like a huge Kanye fan. You're always talking about Kanye. I think about these rappers, and what happens with them is you have all these rappers who most of them are these guys that had really rough backgrounds. Their family was poor, but they made it, and they made a lot of money. Like, you think about Kanye. I also think about Jay-Z. Like, Jay-Z, he had a really rough upbringing. He's now like one of the richest people in music.
Yeah, just talking about Jay-Z, I saw this clip online a couple days ago. And essentially the point of view was he was telling the story about one of his uncles that came up to him. And he brought up a good point that people who tell other people that like they can't make it in the arts, or like they shouldn't do the arts because, it's such a hard market, they're usually projecting their own feelings about that thing onto the person. So if someone had a passion that they weren't able to chase or something like that, they're going to tell another person who's trying to chase their passion, oh, there's no way you can do that, like there's no way you can make it. And he was just like, there's no way you can make it. That's just you projecting your feelings on me. I'll do my best and I'll make it. And look, he made it.
But like what happens with a lot of these rappers is like, so they have all those struggles, and then they grow up and they end up making it in the music game. And so because of that, it like goes off of what you said. They're projecting their experience from it. These rappers that are successful are projecting their experience. They said, hey, I was able to make it, so I'm going to go and tell people that they can make it. So that's inspiring, and I love that. But there's an extent to where you're telling millions of kids in poverty that, just millions of kids in general, not in poverty, that if they work hard, then if they work hard enough, then they can become a rapper like them. And to an extent, they're right, but to a large extent, they're not, because out of all the if a million people try to become a rapper, I don't know, maybe like 5 will become really successful. So if you're one of those 5, then you're going to feel confident in telling those kids, hey, you can make it, when really most of them probably won't make it. So I think you should encourage children to do that, but you should also tell them, hey, there's a good chance you might not make it. We need to be realistic with the chances of people making it. Like when you see girls at your high school that are like, I want to be the next Taylor Swift, it's like, okay, I support you trying to do that, but also be very realistic with your chances.
So we've kind of gotten off topic about education.
Well, it's related.
Yeah. Grace, do you have anything to say about education, or even what we were just talking about?
With like, I guess Kanye and Jay-Z, I think it's also a matter of just something as simple as patience, because when you look at how successful Jay-Z right now is, or how successful he is right now, like he's a middle-aged man, and he's very successful, but I think the pressure is that right off the bat, like as soon as you graduate from college or you get out of grad school, you're successful, but that doesn't happen. Like it takes time. So like definitely you can make it, but I think the unrealistic expectation is that, yeah, you can work hard now and you'll get it like in your mid 20s, like you'll peak then. But like in most cases, you don't actually peak then. You peak later on after you have experience, after you know, had a few falls, but like eventually you get there. And so, like, I always like joked around with my dad, like, yeah, I'm gonna become a millionaire and like I'll send you off to a nice vacation. And but when I really think about it, like I'm only living comfortably now because my dad became more successful like with his job later on. Like
Mhm.
um I was obviously too young to remember this, but like when I was a baby, like my mom had to work too to make ends meet. But like now it's just mainly my dad supporting the family, but he's 50. So like or above 50. So it definitely takes a long time to get where you are. And I think people are forgetting that. And they have this idea that, oh, yeah, like I'll be young, rich, and famous like as soon as I come out of college or as soon as I pursue my passions, like I'm going to get where I want to be in that moment.
And that's a really good point that people don't usually bring up, is that college is not like a straight pathway to a job or success or anything like that. Like I see so many stories about people who graduated college and then they just go straight back living with their parents, you know. They've been out of college for a year or two and they still haven't found a job, you know. College is almost seen as a requirement now for a lot of jobs. So that means that puts you at the baseline and you
Mhm.
still need more experience and more education and stuff to get to a certain point where you're going to be competitive in your field. It's not just a straight shot to whatever life you want to live.
Mhm. And another book I feel like I've talked about with Patrick, it was called Generation Me, and it was all about like, so okay, I like to complain about our generation, but the problem with that is everyone likes to complain about our generation, so I don't feel like special or like I don't feel smart when I start doing it, because you know like some of the worst of our generation will complain about our own generation and they think they're smart because they're doing that. But like there were really good points in that book. It's like kids today feel like it's because of the whole self-esteem culture of the like always telling kids they're special and they're great. Um, like what we're talking about with not getting a straight path to a good career after college, kids today are way more likely to feel that they deserve something, like just because they did all the work for it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I did a bunch of stuff to make myself look good to get into JMU, and I didn't get it, and I'm disappointed. But I'm not going to say that's not fair. I deserved it. No, I don't deserve anything. I worked very hard, but that doesn't mean I should instantly get it. And so these kids are the most likely to feel like they are entitled to something because they worked for 4 years in college for it. And once they get a job, they're very unrealistic with like how fast they're going to climb the ladder. There's like all these statistics, like, oh, this percentage of people think they're going to be the CEO of the company in 5 years. Like, no, you're not. You're not going to be anywhere near that. You'll probably never be the CEO. So like I sound really contradictory when I'm talking about how we should approach education now, because a lot of people have the idea that we should just keep going towards this like optimistic view or this passionate view of education, where like we should always be telling kids to follow their dreams and uh, you know, all that good stuff. And I agree with that, but there should also be the extent like where we should be realistic. So we need to be realistic. Say like, hey, your chances of doing this might this is going to be tough for you. Even like not just with arts and everything, like with engineering and being a lawyer, like uh, other things in that book they talk about like people are very unrealistic with what they think they're going to achieve. Like way more people think they're going to get a PhD than actually get a PhD. And people think as long as they want to, like as long as they're on the path to become a lawyer, they're going to just become a lawyer. So even with like fields that we think are like the heartless, like just get a job, make a lot of money roles, we need to teach kids that they're going to have to work harder than they ever have for what they want. So we do need to have this good, optimistic, like encouraging uh, worldview. We want that to rub off on the kids, but we also want them to assess accurately the work they need to do to attain those goals.
Mhm. I think like you brought up like this self entitlement kind of issue, and I think the biggest problem is like a lot of just like kids in our area especially like struggle with that, because I know for myself like since I'm a senior now, I'm like, wow, like I worked so hard the past 4 years, and like I feel like, you know, I deserve a break. But when you really put it into perspective, like 4 years of your life, like how much of your life really is that?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like bringing up the whole like being optimistic or like positive thought, like um, I think it's important that you like don't give up, but at the same time when you look at all the celebrities who are standing there and saying like, yeah, like I never gave up, like people always try to shut me down and I'm here where I am today, like sure, like yes, I do give them credit for that, but how many people are the exact same age and are still not giving up and are still pursuing their passion but aren't at that level yet? So like
Mm-hmm.
it's not just because you work hard and you never gave up doesn't mean you're actually going to get where you want to be.
Yeah, that's like what I was saying with all the rappers stuff. It's like we look at the couple people that made it through and became successful rappers, but we don't pay attention to the millions of people that like didn't make it because they listened to what this one rapper said. And it's funny because when I hear people saying that they skip school all the time and they're like getting straight A's in school, I'm like, how is that even possible? Like, I never skipped school. I never came in late, even though like high school was very rough for me. So I went in all the time and I still got terrible grades, but I didn't do the work. So I mean, it's not like I'm making an excuse, but it's kind of like what you're talking about with college as an indicator of intelligence. It's like you can apply that to other things in high school. Like attendance isn't an indicator of how well you're going to do in school and all these other things. So, and then with the self entitlement thing, I was thinking of something else. It's like I forgot what I was gonna say, but I think with the arts in schools, like we were saying before, it is very important to keep those things, not just because some kids want to pursue them. Even if kids don't want to pursue arts, it's still very important because there's a lot of research that shows things like, I'm just going to take playing an instrument, for example. Patrick plays violin, right? So there's a lot of research in neuroscience that shows that just playing an instrument like the violin, just I can't make the correct terminology, so I'll just say makes connections in your brain that are beneficial for other types of learning. Like if you can learn to play a beautiful piece of music, you can memorize that and you have the finger dexterity for that. That can do great things for helping you memorize science or math or history. So we need to stop looking at the arts as if it's just this thing that kids that have these dreams are going to try to use to go and become a successful artist when they might not. We should start looking at it as something that can benefit, something that can supplement the subjects that we're really trying to teach our kids.
Oh, so like it just reminded me of something. So like, about supplementing like your other subjects. I think in high school, I mean, definitely for me and like my other friends, like we always complain, like, when am I ever gonna use this like in the real world? Like, when am I ever going to like, um, take the area of some sphere? Like, if I'm not gonna be a mathematician, and I think more than that, I think we're failing to recognize that like our classrooms is not exactly, if it isn't a learning experience for us, it's a training experience, because either way, you're gaining like study skills, you're training your brain to memorize these things, and you're learning to manage your stress, and whatever like exact concepts you may learn in the classroom, like even if they're not applicable to the real world, like the other skills that you gain, like you're definitely going to need those in the workplace anyways. So like, yeah.
And then going back kind of to the music thing, music, it looks like to me, is seen almost as like a resume patter. Like, hey, look, college, I perform in the orchestra.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a well-rounded person.
Uh-huh.
Accept me into your college. And that kind of pisses me off as a musician. It's like, I'm not saying you should want to be a music major or anything, but you shouldn't take a music class if you're not going to be passionate about it, you know? Like, I go in there and I see kids who are like, "Oh, I have never practiced this music. I'm
Yeah,
so
yeah.
screwed." I'm like, "Why are you in this class then? You know,
Yeah.
why are you here if you don't care about it at all? You know, it just
Mhm.
it pisses me off."
It's like making light of, like, you're very passionate about music. You're trying to go into music, and people are just using it as something that'll make them look a little bit nicer to college, when it's like that's something that you're trying to dedicate your life to.
Yeah.
It's like it's like, I mean, with me, it's like if I really like, I mean, I like every subject. Let's say someone's taking, like, okay, I took geology this whole year because originally I wanted to be a earth science teacher, and now I'm like, I think I kind of like history more. I still don't know what subject I want to teach, but it's like I'm taking geology because I really love it, and at the time I'm like, this is something I want to go into. And then like my lab partner doesn't care about geology at all, and it's like, I'm just taking this because I need a class. And it's like, well, don't say that to me when, like, this is something I'm really excited about. So I can kind of have that same feeling as you do. Grace, I'm glad you brought up, like, when am I going to use this? Especially you hear that in math classes. Okay, so I always hated math, but this semester I took calculus and I loved it. It was my favorite class. Like, every week at dinner, my dad would ask me, because I have dinner with my dad every Tuesday. He would, like, always ask me a couple of the same questions, and one of them was, "What's your favorite class right now?" I would always say calculus, and it's because math is a good example of something where we might not use it, but you have to understand, like we were saying, the supplemental effects of taking certain classes. You have to understand. To me, like, calculus was a class where, just at the core, it was just learning for learning's sake. Like, I'm not going to go into a field where I'm going to have to figure out the area under a curve, but just the fact that we could use these laws of logic and use these numbers and these theorems to figure out the area under some curve, like, to me, that seems like a useless thing, like, for what I'm interested in. Of course, it has a lot of use for engineers and anyone in a STEM field. But just the fact that you can do that is so amazing to me. So I was excited to just learn new things. And then also with a lot of math, we should talk about this sometime, Patrick, when we talk about philosophy. But, like, math is like the purest form of, like, logic. Like, you have there's this comic you might have seen before. It was like the subjects, like, increase in purity as they go to the right, and so there's a sociologist, and he's like, my field is the purest, and then the psychologist is like, sociology, he's like, sociology is just applied psychology, and then the neuroscientist is to the right, and he's like, psychology is just applied neuroscience, and then the biologist is like, neuroscience is just applied biology, and then it goes on, and it gets to, like, the physicist, and he's like, physics is just applied chemistry, and then the mathematician's all the way to the right, and he's like, you guys are cute. And because math is like the purest form of logic and understanding. And then you just have to understand, math is like, when you're math is the subject where you grapple with abstract things, and once you understand something that's abstract, it's just so exciting, and it's like you can feel your mind working while you're doing math, and that's an important experience for anyone to have when you're learning anything. I mean, no one sits in history class, well, people probably do, but, like, you don't sit in history class and try to, like, figure out history like it's a math problem. But because you've taken difficult math classes, figuring things out in other classes might be easier. So in one book I was reading, it was like, Why Don't Kids Like School? It's this cognitive psychologist talking about why kids don't like school. And one of the things is he's talking about, or no, it was this book on math. It was this math book. So he's talking about why people don't like math. And he's saying, you do all these things in math in the same way that soccer players do drills. Like, we do math problems to exercise our mind and to have our mind work better, in the same way that soccer players do drills so that they'll be better at soccer. Like, doing drills isn't the game, in the same way that doing math problems isn't the game. The game is when we have to think, and that goes outside of math. It's all subjects. So math, in a great sense, is a supplemental subject. Even if you're not going into math field, math just helps you to think and it exercises your brain. It's like doing crossword puzzles or all these things and that people do to help their minds work. And that's what was so great to me about that calculus class, is because it felt like I was solving a puzzle, and that's just very healthy for your brain.
I like the analogy you made with like it being a game or versus a drill, because I think a lot of us want to play the game without ever having to do the drills.
Of course, yes.
And like when you mentioned like why don't kids like math, or like why don't kids like school, I think, or this kind of just popped into my head, but I know definitely, like, I'm not a math person, but when I, like, I don't know, maybe take the area under the curve, or, like, find it after it's been rotated around the x-axis or something, like, there's definitely a rewarding moment when I finished all my homework. I'm like, wow, like, I actually did all of this. Like, it's sort of like your own mini eureka. And I think a lot of times, like, our motivation, going back to grades, is the grades. But the thing is, like, you're always going to have to meet the grade or make the grade, and so like your satisfaction that comes from that is like really temporary. But like when you know you've learned something, like my comparative teacher this year, like she used to do these like I forget what they're called,
The group.
yeah, the group competitions, which
Yeah.
are like basically like you're reviewing over what you learned before, and they were such a drag, and like we would always complain like, oh, like why are we doing this? But then,
Everybody hated
yeah,
them.
everyone hated group competition. But then like at the end of the year, she's like, she made us fill out this paper of just like write down everything you can think of about these 7 countries. And like when we finished writing, she's like, at the beginning of the year, when I asked you to write something down about each country, like you had like one thing, maybe none on the paper. And so like there was definitely a sense of satisfaction, like, wow, like somehow like my brain managed to retain that. And so like with math, it's like, wow, like I can manage to pull apart a problem. I can make something that's abstract into something that's like logical in my head. So
The the book I was talking about with why kids don't like school, each chapter at the beginning there's like a myth of education, and he kind of has the answer to it that kind of debunks it. And one of the things that was kind of related to my calculus class was it was the first chapter. Like, the thing people have to understand about the way we think is our brain is wired to not think. That's why, like, when we do things for the first time, people will take the example often of driving your car. The first time you drove a car, you had so much trouble and you had to think about everything. But over the time, you didn't think about driving more. You thought about driving less. On the way driving here, like, have you ever driven somewhere and you get there and then you think about your drive there and you were like, I feel like I zoned out the whole time. I was just driving on autopilot. And then you feel like that was a very dangerous thing to do. But you're like, that's how everyone drives. So the reason people don't like school and they don't like thinking and everything is because they have to think. Thinking is something none of us want to do. So what made my calculus class exciting was one of the things he was talking about in this chapter. He was saying learning is exciting when it's just hard enough, where it challenges you, but it's not so hard that you can't accomplish it. So my calculus class was exciting because it was hard enough where I felt challenged and I felt smart while I was doing it. But it wasn't so easy that I felt like, there was no reason to even do it. So when people make progress, whenever I got a right answer, it just felt so good. It was like taking a drug. So I feel like we need to learn how to teach school in a way that challenges students, but isn't so challenging. And the way we teach it now isn't really like challenging or easy. It's just that it's filled with so much like useless stuff, like all this homework they give us, and the way we do things feels so useless all the time. There needs to have some feeling of progress. And like you're saying, the end of year, it felt so good to have made progress. That's because you were doing all these drills. Um, like to go back to that analogy, those were the drills. And then in the end, when you were playing the game, it felt good because you had made progress. So we need to give students something to progress towards, and that would just help them to it would make them feel like they're doing something worth their time, and because there's nothing more worth your time than going to school and learning something new.
And with those drills are, in my opinion, what makes the difference between a professional and an amateur. You know, like when you talk to a professional and you're like, how did you get here? Or you talk to like a famous musician, it's like, oh, how are you so good? They're like, oh, I practice. Then like the professional musicians will be like, yeah, I practice for like 5 hours a day. And to them, that's normal. And everyone's all like, what? That's crazy. How can you do that? But that's how they got so good. It's with the practice and with the drills. Like you never see like a professional soccer player and they're like, oh, I just played soccer with my friends a lot, or like I just played a lot of soccer games. It's like, no, I practiced my shooting, and like I practiced a lot. And that's how you get places. And that's kind of something I feel we need to instill in children, is that you got to do the hard grunt work, you know, and that's what will give you the ability to do well in the game. It's not all about the game. That analogy is so good.
Yeah. Well, I didn't come up with it. It was the guy, I forgot the name. It was the name of the book was How Not to Be Wrong, and the whole book was like kind of cool math stuff. But one of my favorite chapters in the Why Don't Kids Like School book was kind of what you were talking about with experts. You always hear teachers asking, and like I have asked myself this, like as a teacher, how am I going to do this? People always ask, how can we teach our children to think like scientists and like professionals? How do we teach them to think like historians and mathematicians? And if you're teaching music, how do you teach them to think like a virtuoso? And the simple answer is you can't. And the reason you can't is because scientists and mathematicians and historians are experts in their fields, and they're experts because they've spent their whole life working towards that, and they've been working so hard towards it. It kind of goes like what you're talking about, like there's no such thing as like raw talent. Like people might be more predisposed towards being a good soccer player or a good violin player, but you don't get good without the practice. And so you can teach kids to think like scientists in the way that you can teach kids to have a sense of wonder about the world in the same way that scientists do. Like I've been able to be excited to learn things because I've been able to teach myself that just like learning new things is exciting. It's exciting to know more stuff. But so you can teach kids to feel excited to learn things, but you can't teach them to understand complex theorems in mathematics just by, telling them like, here's how a mathematician thinks. They have to like be involved in the field for a long time. So all I'm trying to say is you can teach them to have the wonder, but that wonder has to lead them towards wanting to learn everything necessary to become a mathematician or a scientist.
Yeah, the hard work. Yeah.
Good reply.
Yeah, I was just like thinking about the whole like game analogy, and this is kind of going off topic from what you were just talking about, but I think another like struggle is so the thing with drills is that they're pinpointing a certain skill. So like for example, I played tennis. I didn't play this year, but I used to play tennis, and there's different parts to tennis. Like you can practice your forehand, you can practice your serving, you can practice your volleys. And as much as I could rally with my friends and have fun, I'm still going to have a flawed game because I never took the time to pinpoint those like specific parts of my game. So like I think like even in school, like, you have this thought like, okay, like I'm just gonna kind of do everything and I'm gonna get straight A's, but then you don't pinpoint your like areas that you're struggling in because you're just trying to have like, oh, all APs and all A's, but you need to really direct your energy towards what you're lacking in. And so I think Yeah, the difference with like a professional and amateur is you're willing to look at your weaknesses and address them head on.
Hmm. One of the reasons I did, well, the reason I did so terrible in high school was because I saw everyone taking AP classes, and I'm like, oh my god, I don't have any AP classes. So I went from a junior year was the year I did this. I went from never taking any honors classes to taking 2 AP classes, and so then those just killed me. And it's like I just did that because I was like, oh, I have to compete with everyone else, and so yeah, I just went into that without ever having learned how to study or how to get work done. I was just a complete procrastinator back then. Although I don't know if you can call it a procrastinator if you don't eventually do the work. Like in order to be a procrastinator, you have to do the work at some point. But if you just don't do the work, then I guess that makes you like a slacker or something.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm doing better in school now uh, because I've been able to learn how to manage my time. And I don't know. There's just a sense now of when I get assigned work, it's like I just start working on it right away. I have to do it right away. And also just prioritizing. Like whenever I have a couple different things to do, I do whatever is due first. And so there's a where there are like certain classes and programs in schools that help kids do these things. I know like freshmen in college have to take like a freshman seminar or whatever. For me it was called like student development, and it was more like a it was more like a like it was kind of like a my professor in that class was kind of like a Tony Robbins type. He was like here's how to live a good life and here's how to balance everything, and it's like it was kind of nice, but um it is nice to have someone like that and have a class like that that'll encourage people to be successful. I do think that was very beneficial. But yeah, it's just like it's not just going to class and doing all the work in class. You also have to do it outside of class, and that's why a big part of being successful in school is you have to do a lot of it yourself. We need to stop like I hate all this like whenever someone does terrible, they blame the professor. And it's like there are terrible professors that do terrible things, but it's like I don't like it when you're assigned a certain amount of work and people are like, this professor's crazy. It's like, no, you just do the work because you have to take responsibility for it.
Going back to what Grace said about the drills targeting a certain thing, I think that's a big problem is people don't really know how to study. And I don't know if that's something you can really teach, although to a certain point, of course it is. But it seems like when people say they're studying, they're just like reviewing everything, you know? When in reality, you got to target the stuff that you're weak on. And it's like, oh, I have no idea how to do this, so I'm going to study this. Or if you're in history class, like, I don't know who these people are. Or my weakness in comparative was always court cases. So it's like, I got to study those, you know? So I'm so glad there was only one court case on the AP exam. But anyways, it's just there's so many things that kids say like, oh, school's not preparing us for real life. You know, like they're like, oh, it never taught me how to do my taxes or balance a checkbook. And it's like, yeah, sure. But those are all things you can look up. I think a big thing that school should try to teach us is how to study and how to focus on learning things that we don't know.
Mm-hmm. I think a big part of like, oh, they never taught me how to prepare for life, and it's like I would appreciate like schools taking a bigger role in that. Although we need like people just in general, people need to be told like you have to do a lot of this stuff yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why like some of this self-esteem movement stuff is like it just makes people feel like they're not responsible for any of this. Like I'm not always trying to I'm probably more of a like, hey, you got to do it yourself. I'm more of a like responsibility type person than a lot of people are, but I'm not like completely. It's like, hey, we need to help our kids do this. But by helping, I mean like we have to teach our kids responsibility, and also a big part of it is like going back to what we were saying about people feeling self-entitled is whenever you hear like everyone that tries to tell you like, hey, you know this is going to be tough for you, like anyone that doubts anything you do is instantly called a hater. Like if someone's going into music and I'm like, hey, this is a tough field, like you have to be willing to work hard for this and you have to be ready for anything, and no matter how hard you work you might not even make it. If I told that to someone, they'd be like, stop talking to me, hater. It's like, no, I'm being honest with you. Like, so I feel like we need to stop being worried about like looking like a hater and being able to be realistic with kids. And like, when I say all this, I'm not saying like, hey, go tell kids that they're not going to make it. It's like going back to what I was saying about encouraging kids to do what they love and pursuing it. But when you tell people to pursue what they love, you need to put the idea in their head that the most important thing is the hard work. And because when we say like, when I feel like when kids say they're passionate about something, like our analogy again, I feel like a lot of them are passionate about playing the game, but they're not passionate about doing the drills. So like when I think about wanting to be a teacher or wanting to be a writer, because like I kind of want to do both at the same time. I think like, am I ready to do the drills? Like, when I read stuff like how to become a better writer, how to be a good teacher, it's like, oh, you got to get up in front of an empty classroom and do an hour-long lecture. And I ask myself, am I ready to do that? And I say, yeah, I want to be a good teacher enough where I'm going to do that. Are you ready to like put like all your hours into perfecting this? And I say, yeah, I'm ready to do that. So it's just people need to start asking themselves just not what's it going to be like to do this thing, but what's it going to be like to try to perfect this thing that you're doing. You got to be ready to, you got to be passionate enough about the game to do the drills. That's all we're trying to say.
Yeah. I read somewhere, and I'm only remembering like half of the quote because there's two parts to it, but like with like, at least for art, because I take art, it's like inspiration or waiting around for inspiration is for amateurs because like you said, like the drills are what get you to play the game and be successful at it. And I think that's just like in a school environment, when you brought up like competition, like you saw other people doing these things and that's what motivated you to do them. Like, sure, like you can be inspired by them, but you have to realize you can't compete with them because you're not on the same playing field as them. And the way you graduate from one playing field to the other or to the next is like through drills. Like, because when you first start playing, I don't know, soccer or basketball, your playing field is a lot smaller and you're with people who are your size. But then when you have this expectation that you're going to go on to the next like big thing without ever having, you know, built up all those baby steps to where that big thing is, like that's when people fall and that's when people fail. So
I think I have a good personal example of this like analogy. I did stand-up comedy for some time and I stopped. I might get into it again sometime. But there was like an odd thing going on when I was doing it. I was like a one-liner comedian, so I would just go up and I'd have a piece of paper with them and I'd just tell the jokes, and I didn't put a lot of effort into, I never put effort into perfecting my presentation or the way I told jokes, and I didn't think a lot about comedy. I just went up and did it. So, and I didn't have a problem with that. So that means I only wanted to play the game and I didn't want to do the drills. And I was completely fine with that. Like, if I went up and did comedy again, I still wouldn't do that because I didn't care. I didn't, and I still don't care enough about being a comedian where I'm going to put that time into it, because I don't want to be a great comedian. I just want to go up and tell a couple of jokes and make people laugh. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if I was a person that was like, I want to make it big and I want to be a good comedian, I want to pursue this, and I did what I do, I would expect people to laugh at me because I didn't put any time into it. But the fact that I was like, hey, I just want to go and tell a couple of jokes. This isn't my biggest worry. I'm not going to put a lot of time into this. Then that's okay. I just want to make a couple of people laugh.
The example I kind of see of that a lot is when people see someone who's put in the work, they don't see the work that person has put in.
Yeah.
So to them, it just looks like talent or like experience in the long term. You know, like, oh, if I keep on doing this, even if I don't practice, like, let's say, even if I don't practice violin, I'll be as good as my teacher, right? But the thing is, when a professional violinist comes up and can play and can sight read the music that you're working hard on, it's because they've learned music so many times. They've learned so many new pieces of music that just they can just pick up on something at your level easily because of how many times they've done it and how much they've learned how to do it. They've followed the drills and now they can play the game whenever they want. And the Babbling Idiots are now producing your favorite sports podcast. Drills, games. This is now a sports podcast. Anyways, we're reaching that time limit now. So thank you for everyone who's listening, and thank you, Grace, for coming on with us today.
Yes, thank you.
Thank
We
you for
enjoyed.
having
we
me.
enjoyed
It was
the
fun. It
discussion.
was good to talk to you. And yeah, that's it. Have a good night, day, whatever it is. Yeah, that's it. Have a good night, day, whatever it is.